There is something that almost no one understands about those who are late bloomers. And maybe you have already felt it within yourself. It's not just about time, it's not just about delay, and it's definitely not about failure. It's something quieter, deeper, more unsettling, because he who blooms late, it doesn't arrive like the others. It does not grow in the eyes of the world. It does not receive validation at the expected time. It doesn't follow the collective rhythm. In fact, for a long time, this person seems invisible, out of place, disconnected, as if he were living out of the right time. But there is a truth that few have the courage to face. Some souls, they were not made to bloom early, because they're not just growing, they are being broken, rebuilt, and prepared for something that cannot exist in superficial versions. Carl Jung said that what is not lived consciously returns in a deeper way, and those who bloom late, he almost always spent years living something that no one saw, an invisible process, a silent transformation, an internal death that happens far from the applause, and when it finally flourishes, it is not just an evolution, it is the end of an old identity and the birth of something that can no longer be turned back. The time you thought you were lost, but were being prepared. There is a kind of pain that does not scream. It does not manifest itself in visible crises. It doesn't draw attention. He doesn't ask for help. She just remains. And for a long time, you believed that this pain meant that something was wrong with you, that you were late, that he was falling behind, that he had missed something that everyone else seemed to have found. As the world moved forward, you felt like you were standing still, as if he were watching life from the outside, as if something inside you doesn't keep up with the rhythm of everything around you. And in the silence of it all, a doubt arose that few have the courage to admit, what if I never bloom? This question is not light. It does not pass quickly. She stays. It echoes in solitary moments. It comes out when you compare yourself, when you see other people evolving, conquering, finding themselves, while you're still trying to understand why it all seems so much harder. But there is something you didn't see at that moment. Something that can only be understood later. You weren't lost. You were being prepared in a way that is not visible, in a way that cannot be explained to those who have never been through this. Because this type of preparation does not happen outside, it happens within. She demands that parts of her be broken, may illusions be destroyed, let expectations be uprooted. And this does not happen quickly. It doesn't happen comfortably. It doesn't happen with recognition. On the contrary, it happens in silence, in the distance, in the feeling of being alone, even when surrounded by people. This is the kind of process that cannot be accelerated, because he is not training someone ordinary. He is deconstructing everything that is superficial, so that something truer can exist. And that's why it feels like you're standing still, because while others are building identities, you're being forced to lose yours. While others are becoming something, you are being led to question everything you believed yourself to be. And that creates a void, a strange interior space, where you're not who you were anymore. But he has not yet become who he will be. This space is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Because it is in it that something rare is born, something that cannot arise in those who have never been broken in this way, something that cannot exist in those who have always had answers, who blooms late. It does not grow like the others. This person goes through an invisible process that requires more time, more pain, and more silence. And so when it finally blooms, it's not just growth, it is transformation. And all you thought was backwardness. In fact, it was depth being built in silence. The invisible pain that shapes souls that can't be ordinary. There is a type of pain that leaves no visible marks, but it shapes everything. She does not appear in conversations. It is not easily explained. And often, not even understood by those who feel it. It's a constant pain, silent, almost imperceptible to the world, but impossible to ignore inside. And it is this pain that separates those who flourish early of those who bloom late. Because those who bloom early, it usually grows within already accepted structures. But those who bloom late, it is shaped by something deeper, something that goes bankrupt before building. You felt it. He felt that he was carrying something that he did not know how to name, a restlessness, a sense of not belonging, a realization that no matter how hard he tried to fit in, something inside you just didn't fit, and that is tiring. It's tiring to try to be understood. It's tiring to try to adapt. It's tiring to try to function like others, until, at some point, you stop. Not because it solved everything, but because he realizes that there is no point in continuing to try to be someone he is not. And that's where something changes. Not externally, but internally. You start to pull away. Not necessarily from the people, but of expectations, of the versions they created of you, of the ideas that were never really yours. And this distancing is silent. Nobody notices, nobody announces it, but it happens. And it is at this moment that the pain begins to do something different. It is no longer just suffering, and it begins to become consciousness. You start to see patterns, see behaviors, to see truths that previously went unnoticed. And this changes everything, because when you start to see, he can no longer see it. And this creates an inevitable separation. You don't fit in the same way anymore. He no longer identifies with the same things. He no longer reacts as before. And this may seem strange. It may seem cold. It may even seem like you're becoming someone distant, but that's not it. You're becoming a real person, someone who can no longer live in superficiality, someone who can no longer ignore what he feels, someone who can no longer pretend not to understand. And this, it's rare, because most avoid this type of pain, but those who bloom late, crosses, feel, it remains. And that's exactly what turns that pain into something different. She is no longer a burden and becomes a silent force, a base, an invisible structure. And when it finally flourishes, it is not light, it is not superficial, it is not temporary, it's profound, it is stable, it is irreversible, because it was built from something that almost no one had the courage to face. Isolation that was not rejection, it was separation from the old world. There is a moment in the life of those who bloom late in which everything begins to move away, not dramatically, not with obvious conflicts, but in a subtle way, silent, almost imperceptible. People who once seemed close no longer connect in the same way. Conversations that used to make sense, now they seem empty. Environments that were once familiar begin to generate discomfort. And for a long time, you interpreted this as rejection, as if he were being left behind, as if something in you is pushing everything away. But there is something that completely changes this perception when you understand what's really going on. You weren't being rejected. You were being separated from all that no longer corresponded to what you were becoming. And this separation, it doesn't happen outside. It starts within. First as a nuisance, then as a perception, and finally as an impossibility. You just can't fit in where you once did. Not out of arrogance, not by conscious choice, but because something inside you has changed. And this something no longer accepts what once seemed normal. It's as if a part of you has awakened, and now refuse everything that is not true. This type of change creates an inevitable effect, isolation, but not an empty isolation, not an isolation of abandonment. It is a transitional isolation, a space where you stop belonging to the old, but he has not yet found the new. And this space is uncomfortable because it doesn't offer immediate answers. It does not offer validation. It does not offer security. It offers silence. And in silence, you start to hear yourself for the first time for real. No interference, no external expectations, without the need to match. And that's weird at first, because you've spent so much time trying to adjust to the world. What to forget what it's like to exist without that pressure. But little by little, this silence ceases to be uncomfortable, and it begins to become a refuge, a place where you can exist effortlessly, no masks, no adaptation. And it is exactly at this point that something essential happens. You stop looking for belonging, not because he gave up, but because he realized that real belonging, it does not come from outside. It is born within, and when that happens, loneliness changes shape. It stops being pain, and it becomes space. Space for reconstruction, room for clarity, space for something new to emerge. Those who bloom late need to go through this type of isolation, because it is in it that the old loses strength and the new begins to form. And when you look back, he notices something unsettling. Nothing has been taken from you. Everything was removed because it could no longer remain. The quiet moment. When you stop waiting and something inside you changes, there is a point that almost no one realizes, a moment that has no date. There is no announcement. There are no witnesses, but it happens. And when it happens, everything changes. It's the moment when you stop waiting. Stop waiting for things to make sense. Stop expecting recognition. Stop waiting for someone to understand. Stop waiting for the world to finally answer what you've always felt. And this stopping does not come from frustration. It comes from something deeper, tiredness, but not physical fatigue. It's existential fatigue, to try, to explain, to adapt, of insisting on paths that were never really yours. And then, without realizing exactly when, you let go of the need, let go of the expectation. It lets go of the idea that something outside of you needs to happen for you to finally feel complete. And that's the turning point, because the moment you stop waiting, something inside you begins to reorganize itself quietly, effortlessly, no pressure. It's as if all the energy that was previously turned outwards to go back inside. And this creates a subtle but profound change. You start to feel different, calmer, more present, less reactive, less dependent on external responses. And the strangest thing, it's just that you're not trying to be like that. It just happens. Because something essential has been abandoned, the need to become something to be accepted. And when that need disappears, a new way of existing begins to emerge. A simpler way, quieter, more true. You no longer feel the urgency to taste. He no longer feels the need to explain. He no longer feels the urge to fit in. And this may seem to those who look from the outside as indifference, but it is not. It is autonomy. It is presence. It is a connection with oneself that no longer depends on the external gaze. And it is at this point that something even deeper happens. You begin to accept yourself, not as an idea, but as a real experience, with everything that exists within you. Without rejecting parts, without constantly trying to correct it, without fighting against yourself. And this changes everything, because when you accept yourself, you stop dividing yourself, and when you stop dividing yourself, your energy is no longer fragmented. It becomes whole, consistent, strong, and it is exactly this coherence that marks the beginning of something irreversible. You're no longer trying to become somebody. You are no longer looking for a place. You are no longer waiting for the right moment. You simply and those who bloom late. He always goes through this moment. An invisible moment for the world, but definitive for those who live, because from him there is no turning back. The death of the old identity, that no one noticed. There is a kind of end, that there is no farewell, there is no announcement, there is no explanation, and most of the time nobody notices, but it happens, quietly, and when it happens, you stop being who you were. Not dramatically, not overnight, but irreversibly. The old version of you begins to fade. The one that needed to be understood. The one who tried to please, the one that molded itself to fit, the one who carried expectations that were never really hers. It begins to lose strength. And at first, that's confusing, because you don't feel like it's becoming something new yet. But he can also no longer be who he was. It's a strange space, an internal break, where everything seems to be in suspension. And it is in this interval that something happens that few can sustain. Symbolic death. It's not physical, it is not visible, but it's real. Parts of you that once defined your identity cease to exist. Old beliefs lose meaning. Automatic reactions disappear. Emotional patterns begin to dissolve. And for a moment, this may seem empty, as if something essential had been lost, but it wasn't. What is disappearing? It is everything that was not truly you, everything that was built out of necessity, by adaptation, for emotional survival, and when that starts to fall, there is no way to prevent it. Because you've seen it, you have already felt it. He has already gone through things that no longer allow him to return to the previous state. And that's exactly what makes this process so silent, because it doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't need to be understood by anyone. It just happens. And those who look from the outside, he does not understand, still sees you. He still recognizes his face. He still hears his voice. But something essential is no longer there. The old way of reacting, to care, to get lost. All of this is beginning to disappear, and instead, a space arises. A space that at first may seem empty, but that in fact, it is where the new identity begins to be born. An identity that was not built to please. An identity that does not depend on approval. An identity that doesn't need to be explained. And that changes everything, because from that point on, you can't go back. Even if you try, even if you want to, even if you miss the simplicity of before, it is no longer possible. Because something inside you has already crossed a boundary, an invisible limit, but definitive. And this is the moment that almost no one notices, but that completely defines who you become. Late blooming, when you become irreversible, and then happens. Without warning, no show, no need to prove anything, you flourish, but not as he imagined, not as the world has taught us, not like the others. Its flowering is not expansive, it's not noisy, it does not seek attention, it is silent, solid, present, and above all, irreversible, because what is born in you now, it cannot be undone, it cannot be ignored, it cannot be hidden. You have become something that no longer depends on external circumstances, something that does not fluctuate as before, something that is not lost as before, and that's what makes those who bloom late unsettling. It's not appearance, it is not behavior, it is presence, a presence that does not try to impress, but it does. A presence that does not seek recognition, but it is perceived. A presence that does not strive to exist, because it simply exists. And there's something about it that others feel, even without understanding. Because this way of existing is not common. It is not born of superficial experiences. It is born from everything that you have gone through in silence, of everything you endured without being seen, of everything you needed to rebuild within yourself. And now, this is manifested, not as something exaggerated, but as an internal stability that can no longer be broken easily. You don't react the same way. You don't get involved in the same way. You don't get lost in the same way. And this may seem to those who observe as distance, but it is not. It's integration. That's when all parts of you, finally, they stop fighting each other. That's when you stop being fragmented, and it becomes whole. And there's something very specific that happens at this point. You stop looking, not because he gave up, but because you realize that what you were looking for, it's already inside you. And this completely changes their relationship with the world. You no longer need things to work out to feel good. You no longer depend on validation to feel enough. You no longer need external explanations to trust what you feel. And this creates a freedom that few know. A silent freedom, deep, almost invisible, but extremely powerful. And that's why those who bloom late, it doesn't just change. It turns into something rare, something that cannot be easily influenced, something that cannot be easily molded, something that can no longer go back to what it was before. And maybe that's what causes that feeling that's hard to explain. There is something different about these people, something that cannot be imitated, something that cannot be taught, something that can only be born after a long, invisible process, a process that few endure until the end. But those who endure, they don't just bloom, they become irreversible.